your kingdom here, let the darkness fear, show your mighty hand.
Matthew 20, verses 1 to 16. Parable of the vineyard workers. For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard. At noon and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw more people standing around. He asked them, "Why haven't you been working today?" They replied, "Because no one hired us." The landowner told them, "Then go out and join the others in my vineyard." That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner, "Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in the scorching heat." He answered one of them, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am generous to others?" So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last.
Well, if you've ever been in front of a group of kinder kids and you're going to choose someone, what do they say? They say, "Pick me, pick me, pick me." Well, when I got to 10 years old as a boy in the schoolyard, and there was a cricket teams being formed during lunchtime, this was not something that I yelled. In fact, none of us did, because we boys were much too dignified for that. We gentlemen stood very quietly in a row, watching and waiting as the two captains chose their first pick, then their second pick, then their third pick, and so on, until there are only two candidates left. Now, I'll admit in my head, I was yelling, "Pick me, pick me." But this was mainly an emotional response because everyone knew what was going to happen. We all knew who was going to get picked first, who were the middlers. I was one of those. And then there were the leftovers. Now, I don't mean that as a derogatory term. It's just that eyebrows would have been raised if those with limited hand-eye coordination got picked ahead of those who could actually catch the ball, bowl somewhere on the pitch, and use the bat for its intended purpose. So the principles at play here went something like this. There were some who had skills, they had very good ability, and because of this, they performed well. They scored runs, they chased down the ball, they got wickets. And this led to lots of pats on the back, to recognition. And as I said, everyone knew who was going to get picked first, and that was a privilege. Not only did the high performers get picked first, they got to bat first or bowl first. And all this ability, performance, and recognition led to, you guessed it, pride and a sense of entitlement. Well, I should get picked first if you want us to win, that is. So does any of this sound familiar? How do you feel about this list of words? You might feel like you have some good ability. Maybe you've had an excellent education. You've developed a lot of skills. You perform pretty well at work and you're recognized by your peers and people look up to you. These are good things. But do you ever catch yourself feeling that others are a bit beneath you, or that you deserve something more than others? Or on the flip side, do you feel like you lack ability, that you've failed, or that you're always stuffing things up, not performing, that you're falling behind, that people don't really value you that much, or that you're overlooked? Today's parable is a response to a question that Peter asked Jesus in Matthew chapter 19. And it happens after the rich young man comes along and asks what he needs to do to be saved. And Jesus says that if he sells everything and gives to the poor, he'll have treasure in heaven. Now, as you know the story, the man goes away sad. But Peter, his eyes light up when he hears about treasure. Ooh, treasure. So he pipes up and he asks, "Oh, remember, Jesus, we've left everything to be your followers. What will we get?" Jesus replies by saying that at the renewal of all things, the disciples would sit on 12 thrones and they'll receive 100 times as much what they've given up. There was going to be a treasure. But he doesn't stop there. The next thing he says starts with a but. And now I remember a sermon series at a previous church I went to that was entitled The Big Buts of the Bible. Quite clever. And I think what Jesus was about to say here was one of those big buts that we need to pay attention to and that Peter needed to hear. You see, Jesus answered Peter's question on face value, but there was indeed a treasure waiting for him. Elizabeth, if you could show the next slide, please. But he also realized that Peter was missing something really important. You see, the way Peter asked his question suggested he had a worldly view of how heaven works. His logic was a bit like the cricket field. We have left everything. Look what we've done. So what do we get? Or in other words, based on our outstanding performance in giving up everything, what payment are we entitled to when we get to heaven? Now, Jesus saw that Peter needed to learn a thing or two about how the kingdom of heaven really works. So he gives the big but statement. He says, "But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first." And as Jesus often does, he says something entirely unexpected and somewhat curious, hinting that there's going to be some great reversal in God's kingdom. And to explain what he means, Jesus tells this parable of the workers in the vineyard. And then just to make sure that Peter really gets the point, he repeats at the end of the parable, he repeats this but phrase. But interestingly, he actually reverses the phrase itself just to emphasize his point. And he says something like, just like this parable, in the kingdom of heaven, the last will be first and the first will be last. So let's have a look at this parable. I'm going to retell it with a bit of my own license. So here's the owner of a vineyard. Let's call him Murray. And he needed some workers to pick grapes and to do some landscaping in his vineyard. In those days, there was no such thing as seek.com. Sorry, Kat, if you're listening. So you would go to the marketplace and find people who are standing around looking for casual work opportunities. So Murray goes off to find and he actually finds some handsome suntan tradies, and they'd got up super early. They'd done a workout and they'd got down to the market by 6 o'clock, ready to catch the eye of potential employers. When they see Murray, they pull out their printed resumes and they do really well in the interview. Murray hires them and agrees to pay them the daily wage of $300. They get to work. At 9 a.m., Murray sees how much work there is to be done in his vineyard. So he goes back to the market and he finds more guys standing around. They hand over their resumes and also do pretty well at interview. In fact, one of them even has a wine tasting qualification, which certainly might come in handy. So he hires them too. But this time he doesn't say exactly what he's going to pay them. Instead, he just promises, trust me, guys, I'm going to pay you whatever is right at the end of the day. At lunchtime, Murray goes out to the market again and finds some other guys. These ones are actually looking a bit worried when he finds them. They live paycheck to paycheck, you see. And since paychecks come at the end of each day, they were starting to wonder if they would be able to feed their families that evening if they didn't find work. They also didn't have resumes ready, which might explain a few things. But nevertheless, Murray to the rescue, he takes them on anyway, and they get to work. Similar story at 3 o'clock. Finds a few more guys, no resumes, no real skills or experience, but at least they're willing workers. So off to work they go. Back on the vineyard, the guys that had started at 6 a.m. were getting pretty tired after having worked 9 hours, especially because it was a stinking hot day. But they'd made good progress and only 3 more hours to go until knock-off time. Just before 5 o'clock, they notice Murray walking off again towards the market. One of them yells out to him, "Man, what's the point? We're almost finished here." But Murray doesn't seem to hear. When he gets to the market, Murray looks around for a while, but he can't find anyone. Just as he's leaving, he walks past an alleyway and notices 3 guys standing around. Their faces are dirty. Their clothes are ill-fitting and ripped in places, and there's quite a few booze bottles lying around. Murray initially isn't sure whether he'd be safe if he approaches them. But he walks up to them anyway and he says, "Hey guys, have you been standing around here all day? Why hasn't anyone hired you?" At this, one of them looks at him and seems to arc up a bit. And I'll need to sanitize the language a bit here, but he basically says, you taking the mickey? Go on, get out of here." Murray doesn't seem too phased, but he replies, no mate, I'm serious. What gives? Why hasn't anyone hired you?" The 3 guys start laughing now, and then eventually they stop when Murray just stands there looking at them, waiting for a response. "What are you, blind? Look at us, mate. No one hires us. Even if they did, I've got a crook leg. Jimmy here has the shakes, and Jakey here, well, let's just say there's a few kangaroos loose in the top paddock." Murray smiles. "Well, fellas, today's your day. How'd you like to come and work for me? There's a heap of work to be done in my vineyard, and I reckon I can find something you guys can do. Crook legs, shakes, and kangaroos are welcome at my place, and I'll make sure you get paid. After all, I'm the one paying. Hey, I'm Murray, by the way, but you can call me Muzzer." The 3 friends can't believe it, but when Murray keeps standing there as if he's actually serious, they eventually decide they might as well go along with it. Sure enough, Murray brings them back to his vineyard and gives them some jobs to do. It's probably around 5:30 by the time they get started, just as the sun is getting low in the sky. The other workers see the new recruits and look at each other with a mix of confusion and amusement, but then carry on. At 6 o'clock, Murray comes out to the vineyard and rings his bell to signal that it's knock-off time. Everyone gathers to receive their pay, except for the 3 guys from the alley who, to be honest, don't really know what it means when the bell sounds. The 6 a.m. starters step forward to get their pay, but Murray holds up his hand just to say, wait, and calls over to the alley guys to join the rest. As they approach, Murray says loudly, "Here you go, guys, $300 each. Job well done." Well, they couldn't believe their eyes. They'd never seen this much money and couldn't believe it. But they didn't argue. They thanked Murray with big smiles on their faces, took the money and went on their way. Murray then pays the guys who started at 3 p.m, then 12 p.m, then 9 a.m, each time saying, "Here you go, guys, $300 each. Job well done." Now, the guys who started at 6 a.m. were getting very fidgety by this time. But sure enough, when Murray calls them up, he says, "Here you go, guys, $300 each. Well, job well done." Well, they couldn't believe it. "What gives, mate? You paid those homeless guys the same amount as us. We've worked hard 12 hours long. We've got some pretty bad sunburn to show for it too." Those guys did hardly anything, but now we get the same pay as them. Murray smiles calmly and replies, friends, you've got an interesting view of fairness. You agreed to work for $300 and that's what I paid you. That's pretty fair if you ask me. Now about the other guys. They need the money just as much as you do. More, really. So what is it that's so offensive? That I pay them before I pay you? That I care about them? Or that I'm just generous and gave them what they need? You know what? Go and think about this. Today is actually not about what you did or what they did. It's about what I did. So the thing that Peter had missed is that the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom of grace. A few weeks ago, Paul pointed out that mercy can be defined as not getting what you deserve, whereas grace means getting what you don't deserve. And in this parable, Jesus teaches Peter and the other disciples that entering the kingdom of heaven is not about ability or performance, and the rewards in the kingdom of heaven are not given out because of earned privilege and entitlement. The kingdom of heaven is a kingdom of grace. So right now, today through this week, I invite you to reflect on what God's grace means for you. Is there a reversal that needs to happen in something in your life, how you're approaching life, how you're thinking? Do you need to pivot away from depending on yourself towards living in God's grace? And this has been a great parable for me at the moment, because I certainly feel like I need this message in my job, in my work at the moment, which sometimes feels excruciatingly geared towards these principles of ability, performance, and recognition. And so for the rest, this little bit, I'm just going to preach to myself and you can listen in. But here are some reversals that I'm taking into this week. So the world focuses on our ability. The story of grace starts with recognizing our inability. We're all equally unable to save ourselves. We're all in great need, and none of us have earned that full day's wage. Romans 3 says there's no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified freely by his grace. Where then is boasting? It's excluded. So for me right now, this week, this means when I feel overwhelmed or when everything feels too much to handle, God's grace assures me that I'm secure and loved. The world focuses on our performance, and religions are about how we can work our way up to heaven or to paradise or to nirvana. But in the kingdom of grace, God makes his way down to us in Jesus. Instead of us climbing up to him, he comes down to us. And that's what the incarnation is. Jesus came to us because we could never get to him on our own. So for me this week, it means I need to just rest in him and draw strength from him. The world focuses on recognition. We say, look what I've done. But Jesus says, no, look what I've done. And grace is always about what Jesus has done for us, what he is doing in us, what he offers to us as a gift. Ephesians says, for it's by grace that you've been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it's the gift of God. So for me, this means I need to redirect my thoughts towards worship, to intentionally recognize God's greatness and his grace for me. The world focuses on privilege. In the story of grace, though, Jesus invites everyone to belong, no matter who you are, where you're from, what you can do or what you've done, good or bad. You can belong in this community of grace. So for me this week means I need to be caring for others, but not always just thinking about what I need or what I'm doing. The way of the world leads to pride. The way of grace leads to thankfulness and joy. For me, this means letting go of needing to be what people expect me to be or what I want to be, and just saying thank you, bringing my thanks to God and finding my joy in Him, not in who I am. And finally, the way of the world leads to a sense of entitlement, whereas the way of grace leads to discipleship. One of the interesting things I find about this parable, the vineyard owner could have just given handouts to everyone in need. But no, he wants more than that. He wants to partner with us in working in the vineyard of his kingdom. So he wants to be our line manager, if you like, or in the older language, our master or Lord. He wants to work with us. So in his grace, he calls us to work. But it's not the type of work that the world talks about, this ability, performance, recognitions kind of work. It's work that he gives us everything we need for it. So we receive his grace not because we work, but so that we can work. 1 Corinthians 15:10, Paul says, "But by God's grace, I am what I am. And the grace that he gave me was not without effect. On the contrary, I have worked harder than any of the other apostles, although it was not really my own doing, but it was God's grace working within me." You see how God's grace came first. It made Paul who he was. It gave him ability to do what God wanted him to do. And then he worked hard in God's grace and in his strength. So for this last one, I'll leave you with a question. Which of God's vineyards is he calling you to work in this week? Is God reaching out to you? Is he coming to you and saying, come and work in my vineyard? I just want to finish with an encouragement. May our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us and by his grace gave us eternal encouragement and good hope, encourage your hearts and strengthen you in every good deed and word. Amen.
Show your mighty hand, heal our streets.